Hey there, friends, welcome back. Today I will be reviewing my favorite Haunting Hour episode. This will also have spoilers for the entire thing, so, if you care. This came out in around 2011, so that's when the Haunting Hour kind of started. It ended in 2014, and so this is Brush with Madness. This is season 2, episode 6. And this episode is fairly simple, at least the story. And it's also fairly simple in terms of the cast. There's actually not that many people here in this episode. What I find interesting about The Haunting Hour, similar to Goosebumps, is every episode is its own story. So rarely you'll have two-part episodes or sequel episodes in some cases, such as the Halloween episodes, the Pumpkinheads, and the Return of the Pumpkinheads. But I wanted to review my favorite episode, and this has been my favorite pretty much ever since I saw it. I've seen it a good chunk of times since first watching it. And this episode, like pretty much all the Haunting Hour episodes, it's its own story. So after you watch this, it will be a completely new cast with a completely new villain, a new story. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought that was interesting. Um, so basically, we have like three characters, basically four, essentially including our villain. We technically have two villains. Anyway, we do have Dylan Minnette, who is one of my favorite up-and-coming actors. He was in the Goosebumps movie. He's been in 13 Reasons Why. He's been in quite a bit of things. And so he plays Corey here, who is this kind of obsessive comic book fan who loves art and geek culture and stuff. And we do have Chanel Peloso. I think I pronounced her name right. And she's been in some stuff. And she plays Emma, who is the best friend of Corey, who they're kind of like thick as thieves. They're very, very tight in terms of friendship and stuff. And they have a great chemistry, both the actors and the characters, which is cool. It's kind of what you want in a story like this. And she's kind of like the voice of reason. She's like the mature, level-headed one, and he's kind of like the brash, kind of, arrogant, fast kind of one in terms of just decision making. And we do have Mackenzie Gray, who I believe was also in the episode Long Live Rock and Roll as Sir Maestro, who was the devil in disguise. He also plays in this episode, he plays Alan Miller, which if you don't know, he is actually, that name is pretty much just a kind of a mishmash of two very famous comic book writers, which are Alan Moore and Frank Miller, who did very dark comics, definitely for adults, and you probably know them. I just wanted to mention that that's kind of a mishmash of the two names, which I find is pretty fitting since this is a comic book related episode. So that's kind of cool. Goosebumps also did the '90s show and the series, the book series. They did an episode and a book called Attack of the Mutant, which you may or may not know after watching the videos from this month. That's my favorite Goosebumps book and episode from the series, and that also has a comic book feel or theme, I guess. So yeah, it kind of connects these two. And lastly, we do. You know what? I'm not going to mention him now, but I will mention him later. The main villain of this episode is pretty awesome. It's very realistic compared to some of the other villains in The Haunting Hour, which are more cartoony in a good way. But this villain is much more serious. He's much more real feeling, which will make sense. Anyway, so yeah, we've got Corey, Emma, and Alan Miller. Those are essentially the only characters in the whole episode, basically, other than like background people. Anyway, so the story begins with Corey and Emma, and they're in a comic convention. Basically, it's a Comic-Con. It's pretty obvious. There's a lot of people dressing up, walking around. There's, famous writers and actors and stuff. And so Corey's favorite comic book is, let me try to think. Trying to remember the name of the comic. I don't believe he says the name of the comic book. I could definitely be wrong. but his favorite graphic novelist is Alan Miller, and or I guess his favorite comic illustrator, I should say. So I believe Alan Miller does both the writing and the drawings. It's not really totally clear. Anyway, the name of the book is not important. He's just a very famous like illustrator, and so he's at this convention, and Corey has a chance to meet him, and he completely like bumbles it. He's very creepy. He's like, I follow you on Twitter. I'm your biggest fan. You know, I follow all your work. I know all your art and your stories and stuff. And this really does not sit well with Alan Miller. In fact, after he signs Corey's comic, he actually leaves, and he starts to leave, and he's like, leave me alone. I'm out of here. I'm done. And so Emma's like, well, you screwed that up. Anything else you want to do? And so when Alan Miller is going to leave, Corey notices that he forgets his paintbrushes on his desk, and so he goes to return them. And so his bodyguard shows up, and he's like, "If you don't stay away, I'm going to give you a restraining order. You better stay away." And so the bodyguard tells him that, and then Alan Miller's like, "Leave me alone. I don't want your questions, your obsessions. Just leave me alone." And he's like, "It's kids like you that are why I don't come to these anymore." It's kind of weird. He's almost like being mean, and he's just like very. Apparently, Alan Miller is very like reclusive. He's very paranoid and very just kind of shut off. And so Alan Miller's gone. He leaves the convention, and Corey's all disappointed. He wanted to talk to him, and that's that. And so they go home, and Corey starts to get an idea to steal his paintbrushes. And so, yeah, it's kind of not right morally, but he takes his paintbrushes, he brings them home, and he just starts painting with them, just like off and on, just for fun. Unfortunately, these paintbrushes are haunted, apparently, by some kind of spirit or something, because these things have a mind of their own. And so apparently that's why Alan Miller is so good at painting and making comics, is because they paint themselves. And so that's apparently what's happening now to Corey, who starts painting with the paintbrushes, and they start to paint the future, which I think is awesome. It's a really cool idea. Um, I believe in the Haunting Hour short story collection, there is a similar story which had this idea, which was a great story. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a great story. And it's pretty similar to this. Anyway, the paintbrushes start painting just future events, things involving Emma. He paints this mysterious. Corey basically creates this new character to live in his universe called the Mad Artist, and he's kind of like this man who has a fedora and a black coat, and he's essentially Corey's made-up villain. And so he's like the main character in his new comic series, and he starts painting him all over his the walls in his room and stuff. And it gets pretty bad to the point where the mad artist starts coming from the comic world into the real world. And so now the mad artist is actually physically in the world with Corey and Emma. And so it's really cool. The first scene that we get of him is just some shots of him painted on the wall, but then we cut to Corey's outside of his house, and we see the mad artist physically in costume outside of the driveway, and it's just really, really creepy the way that they set him up. Don't worry, it gets way creepier, which I like. And so the mad artist is now real. He's a real character now, and he's actually stalking Corey and Emma. And so later throughout the episode, Emma, she finds out that the paintbrushes are, magic apparently, and Corey's like, painting with them. She's like, you better return him tomorrow. And this episode takes place, I believe it's about 2 days. I believe 2 or 3 days. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, kind of a short time span. So Emma tries to convince Corey to return the paintbrushes. And he's like, I will, but he gets obsessed and he never returns them. And so Emma, she's kind of weirded out by this, and she gives him a scolding, and she's pretty upset with him, as she should be. And he just starts going off the rails, just painting everything in his room, and it's getting really bad. Um, I do find it a little bit strange, however, that Emma's mom or dad or the parents of Corey, they're never really seen in this episode, which I do have a theory for, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. But eventually, Corey and Emma track down where Alan Miller lives, his mansion, and so they attempt to go and return the paintbrushes. And so Emma goes, and meanwhile, she is going to a friend's house on her bike down the street, and she's gonna go. I think she has like a science fair project or something, and she's going on her bike. And so apparently, Corey painted the mad artist stalking her in a black car, and so that is kind of one of the creepier moments is when she's on her bike and she's on the, I forget which the name of the street is, um, but she's on the corner of the street and he calls her because he figured out that he drew her getting chased by a black sedan. And so the black sedan actually appears in reality, stalking her on the street. And she only barely gets away when she gets off the bike and runs towards um, basically Corey, who is biking. He ends up biking all the way down there, down the block, and saving her. And so the black sedan drives away. And yeah, it's just really cool. I love the way that it feels like a comic book. It feels so animated, yet it's live action. So it's kind of hard to explain. Like, it feels so cartoony, but yet it's very dark and very like adult looking. Like, it's very like, it's almost like a dark adult comic would be, like, I don't know, like a Ghost Rider comic or a Blade comic, something like that, or even like a Batman comic book. I don't know, just like some kind of like a dark story, which I like. And I also like the fact that there's not many characters. It's just Corey and Emma, and then Alan Miller, who appears kind of in between, gets a lot of mentions, and then of course the Mad Artist, who is the this episode's villain, which is a very very good villain. I will say, he's probably my favorite Haunting Hour villain. Most likely. I'm not gonna confirm it, but I think he probably is. Anyway, the story continues. So eventually, Emma actually gets kidnapped by the Mad Artist, and she ends up at Alan Miller's house. And so Corey ends up going down there by himself with no weapons, with no police. Yeah, he's not very the smartest in this, final scene. But you know what? We'll it's a comic book world, I guess. So, you know, um, it kind of makes sense. Anyway, so Corey ends up going to the mansion, and also one more thing I did want to mention before the final, scene and twist reveal is the fact that the mad artist somehow drew a black X on Corey's door and disappeared, and so that apparently means that whoever got the black X mark, it means that they're gonna die next. So I find that kind of interesting. Um, and the mad artist appears to almost be a supernatural force. Like, you never really see him for more than a minute. Not really. Even less than a minute in some of the scenes. Like, he seems to be just have these powers, like to be teleporting and, have these magical abilities, which I think is cool. And it works for something like The Haunting Hour, which is all about the supernatural. So I find that very fitting. Anyway, so the final showdown, basically, is Corey going into the house with, again, no weapons, no nothing, into Alan Miller's house. And he finds Emma strapped to a table. And so he goes down there, and it turns out that the mad artist set a trap for Corey. And so Corey ends up getting trapped and put on the table as well. And the mad artist reveals himself from the shadows. And he looks up, and it turns out to be Corey's face. And also, I believe Dylan Minnette is also acting as the mad artist throughout the episode. So he's not only Corey, he's also the villain, which I think is cool. And so the mad artist reveals to Corey that they're just drawings. They're not even real. They're comic characters like he is. And then they both get strapped to a table, and he brings this chainsaw down from the ceiling. And this is where it gets dark. Like, this is, like, it was pretty, like, creepy, before, but this is where it gets really dark. And this is probably one of the most darkest Haunting Hour episode. In fact, it's probably the second most dark episode. Um, I think Scarecrow is probably the scariest and darkest episode, but this one, in terms of the ending and the twist reveal, and just the fact that they use a chainsaw on humans, is incredibly dark. Um, anyway, way darker than Goosebumps, I'll tell you that. And so yeah, the mad artist takes his chainsaw and he begins to turn the saw on. He's about to saw Emma in half. And so then that's not even the end of it. That's like the second ending basically. The first part of the ending, I should say. So that cuts away and it turns all white. It turns almost like a comic book. And so we transition to Alan Miller, and he's in his basement of his house and he's drawing, apparently he's drawing what's happening now. And so this whole episode was apparently a comic book being made by Alan Miller as revenge for Corey stealing his paintbrushes. And so that's kind of interesting. And so the bodyguard asks Alan, are you done with your story? That boy really, made you paranoid. He really freaked you out. And so Alan Miller's like, well, he's never going to see it. And so Alan Miller takes the comic that he just drew and wrote, and he takes it and he puts it in the paper shredder. And so as that happens, the real twist ending happens. So the kids end up getting killed and shredded by the shredder, and that's kind of symbolic of the chainsaw coming down and sawing them in half. And that's how it ends. It's very dark. It's almost too dark, but they don't show any blood. There's no gore, but it's just disturbing. Like, who thought of this? Like, it's cool, I think, but it's also like they're killing kids. Like, I get it's a comic book, and that's the whole reveal, is that this whole episode is just a comic book, basically. And, the ending is that they get shredded in paper. In the paper shredder, I should say. And, I don't know, I found that cool. But it's just like, wow. That really turned from, like, a creepy kind of cool episode to, like, straight up murder by a paper shredder and, like, a chainsaw. But okay. One of the best things about this episode is Mackenzie Gray's performance as Alan Miller. He's very creepy. He only appears in like the beginning of the episode and in the end, but because he's creating it, it kind of makes sense. And he has this very paranoid, schizophrenic kind of personality, which he did a great job in both this episode and in Long Live Rock and Roll, which is another great episode. That episode isn't so much scary, it's kind of cool, I think. But one of the best parts of that one was his performance as Sir Maestro. And I think he does another great job here as Alan Miller. And he's kind of responsible for all the events, which I think is kind of cool. I think Dylan Minnette did a great job as Corey. He's almost like this very, brash, kind of irresponsible kid, but he's pretty kind. He knows what he's doing most of the time, but when he gets corrupted by the paintbrushes, then things start to go downhill. And I think my favorite character in this episode is actually Emma. She's played wonderfully by Chanel Peloso. I think I pronounced her name right. And she did a great job. She's almost like this, like, almost mentor for Corey. Like, she's his best friend, obviously, and they have a lot of history. And she does a great job of balancing the comedy. She has a lot of the comedy lines, which I think is nice. And then she's obviously scared for her life later in the episode, which I think is great. And she does a wonderful job, I think, at both. And yeah, I think everyone did a great job in this episode. The mad artist was fantastic looking. The design of him is cool. I like the foreshadowing in the drawings on the walls. And then he comes to life, and Dylan Minnette plays him so seriously. It's so cool. Like, he's almost like this gangster that's come to life, and he's like murdering people basically. I do want to mention, it's a little bit disturbing that The Haunting Hour has many great villains, but I think the mad artist is the closest that the show has had to a serial killer. which I think, I mean, serial killing is obviously probably one of the worst things that it just happens on a daily basis, which is unfortunate. But I think it's even creepier that he's treated very seriously, like a real threat, like just a person that you know loves to kill. Which, and in this series, it works. I think it makes sense. It's a little too realistic. I feel like it could be a little bit too realistic for some fans. I think, and that they may not like this episode because of that. Um, but the twist that the mad artist was really just Corey, and I thought that was cool. And I think it's cool that he plays two different parts in this episode. Um, I just find that cool. But yeah, he's very realistic as a villain, and he doesn't even say that much. I think the only lines he has are at the end. Um, and I love the way he is shown, the effects and stuff, the way he appears, and it's just very creepy, very like ominous, which I really like it. He's a great villain, despite not doing too much. I think he just has intimidation. I think that's probably the best thing about him. Um, and yeah, the twist ending is great, as many of the twist endings are in this series. They're all shocking and great and catch you up by surprise, which I think that's kind of important in a show like this. You kind of want to be scared or you want to be surprised. And I think this episode does both, especially at the end. It's scary and surprising. Um, and I also like the twist reveal that Alan Miller wrote this whole story just for revenge. I think that was really cool. It makes sense for him because he's like, you know, paranoid and nervous and anxious, and all because of Corey, who messes it up again. I also like the dynamic between Corey and Emma. They're clearly very good friends, and their friendship starts to fall apart because of this whole haunted paintbrush thing. As soon as the paintbrushes start happening, that kind of it breaks apart their friendship. It's kind of again realistic. It's how something like this would happen in real life, where someone would do something and then the other person doesn't agree, and then the friendship like breaks. It's not a thing anymore, which I think is great. Like I love almost all the Haunting Hour episodes. There are some bad ones, but this is one of the best ones because it's dark, it's funny, and it's surprising, and it's scary at points. It's creepy, which is what you want, and it's one of the most well beloved episodes. And I don't know. I think I like it a lot because it has great performances. It's got an awesome villain, great twist ending, um, and yeah, it's just awesome. And the fact that it's based on a comic book definitely keeps my interest because I'm a big comic book fan. I don't read as many as I used to, but I still enjoy some of the stories and characters. And I think this is one of the best episodes of the whole show. If you're gonna just watch like 3 or 4 Haunting Hour episodes, this needs to be one of them. Even if you're not a comic book fan, I can still see you enjoying this. Especially just go in with nothing, like no knowledge of anything, and it'll be great. I think. I'm gonna give Brush with Madness a 10. There is nothing bad in it, I don't think. I mean, I guess the twist ending is a little bit too dark, but you know what? It works. I'm surprised they were even able to get away with that. So, you know what? I guess it's pretty much because there's no blood, but still, it's pretty dark. Anyway, what do you think of Brush with Madness? Do you like the Mad Artist as a villain? Do you like Dylan Minnette as an actor? What do you think about The Haunting Hour? Do you love it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What do you think of this show? Let me know down below. I will review the rest of my favorite Haunting Hour episodes in due time. Until then, take care. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you like this episode? Do you not? What's your favorite Haunting Hour villain? Favorite episode? Do you like it better than Goosebumps? What's your favorite horror show? I'd love to know. Thank you so much for sticking around, and hope you check out this episode if you get a chance. Yeah, that's all I have to say for this one. Fantastic episode. Hope you enjoy watching it if you ever decide to. But thank you so much for watching. Take care. I will see you for the next one. Have a great day. Thanks again.